Hey everybody, as Kristen said, I'm Diana Verdugo. I head up partnerships and community at Formlabs, a 3D printer company. I'm a passionate advocate for 3D printing, obviously, but also one for personally and professionally an advocate of social impact and little by little finding ways to integrate that into our industry. Along my journey, I've crossed paths with these wildly talented women that inspire me and no doubt will inspire you today as well. So while these women are certified 3D printing experts, their true superpowers come in the form of their ability to set a vision and enable and empower other people to take force and act on that. So, and not only are they solving problems for product redesigns that we talk about really commonly for 3D printing, but they're solving problems for society redesigns. And they share a common tool of 3D printing and a common mission of building an equitable, healthier, thriving community. So when I was asked by the Type team to make this panel, I quickly put together the most disruptive pioneers that came to my mind, and they all said yes. So we had 3 on the list, and we're really grateful to have these incredible people with us talking to us about all the things that they've learned between TED Talks and on the ground in crisis response in Haiti, to enabling a community to produce millions of PPE, to working alongside Dr. Fauci. We have a lot to learn from them. So without further ado, I want our panelists to introduce themselves. We'll start with Dara, as you're next to me.
Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here. It's quite an honor to be with such esteemed colleagues on stage. I'm glad we're able to come together for this event, even with COVID. My name is Dara Dotz, and I'm most known for my work with an NGO that I co-founded with Eric James called Field Ready. And our focus was doing on-demand manufacturing in the field. And we started with 3D printing, but we also use many other methods of manufacturing. And we ask people what they need, and then we work on getting them what they need when they need it and where they need it. So hyper-local distributed manufacturing. And we've done that in over 17 countries. And that's my background mostly in 3D printing.
Awesome. Thanks. Dorothy.
Hi, I'm Dorothy Jones-Davis, and I'm the Executive Director of Nation of Makers, and we're a national nonprofit based in the United States that is here to support maker organizations through community building, resource sharing, and advocacy. And most recently, we've been doing a lot of work around the COVID-19 response in partnership with a lot of different organizations, including Open Source Medical Supplies, Get Us PPE, and Find the Masks. I'm really trying to have that social impact and utilize the tools that we have in our makerspaces around the world to be able to produce PPE and other medical supplies that are necessary.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dorothy. Meghan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Meghan McCarthy. I work with I'm at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and I will say I'm a contract employee, so I'm not going to speak for the federal government at all while I'm here. But my work involves a portfolio of software applications and services that are centered on 3D printing and biovisualization to support the researchers at NIAID. And one of those applications that we have developed is the NIH 3D Print Exchange. And that is a free community-driven site where people can go and find and share 3D printable models related to bioscience and medicine. So that could be structural models or molecular structures, or even like custom labware, and now PPE and those kind of devices. So back in March, we developed a partnership with the FDA, VA, and America Makes to mount this response to support the curation and assessment of 3D printable PPE and devices, which we have retrospectively named COVID 3D Trust, Trusted Repository for Users and Suppliers Through Testing. And that trust is a reference to kind of the trust we had among ourselves, the organizational leads and our organizations on a larger level, but then also gaining trust from the 3D printing and additive manufacturing industry, as well as, to the other end of the spectrum for maker groups, community groups and individuals, and then by extension, the end users.
Amazing. Well, so as you can gather, each one of our panelists have played a critical role in COVID response. And it certainly was one of the largest, most scaled case studies of what social impact means and is. Dorothy, can you tell us a little bit about some of the highs that you've hit in I'd say, community engagement over the COVID response journey?
Yeah, and I will put a plug in. Tomorrow we're releasing a report in collaboration, Nation of Makers, with Open Source Medical Supplies that details a bit of the maker response to COVID-19. I'll be sharing, or Diane, I think you'll be dropping in the link to our 2-pager. But what we can tell you is that, over 48 million pieces of PPE were produced by makers in a 5-month period. This includes some pivoted manufacturers, and this is a global number, 37 million here in the United States. Much of it was 3D printed. We're proud to say 24 million face shields were produced by makers. And again, this is a self-reporting, so this is probably an underreporting of the number and the magnitude of PPE production. And as many people know, this was directly in response to the fact that, unfortunately, our supply chain was dismantled a bit with this particular pandemic. And in the absence of a supply chain that was functioning, makers wanted to do something and get involved and help. And so, this is really a living example of social impact. And it's one that's continuing to go on, and it's actually evolved a bit. The most recent conversations I've had with folks are folks that are continuing to make PPE for our schools, and also individuals that are currently working on social impact, using maker skills to make things like desks for students that need desks at home to have a secure and a quiet place to be able to do their homework during distance learning. So this is just a really great example of the ways that makers have been getting engaged in social impact.
That's incredible. We just shared the report in chat if you guys want to check it out more. Okay, we're going to get into a little bit more specifics here, but COVID will definitely become a theme here. I did want to note that anyone who has a burning question, do pop it into the Q&A. We'll have time at the end to answer questions. So do that while we're talking. Dara, I want to talk about identifying the actual need here. When crisis hits, and people are in need, and we know that there's, turmoil, and, if it's a life and death situation or health or resource crisis, how do you actually know what people need versus perceptions? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think I have a really profound and enigmatic answer for you, and that's simply ask people. I know this is a mind-blowing concept, and it might completely alter your reality. But the most important thing is to really reach out to the people that you're working with and that you want to support. I think that it's so obvious, but a lot of people miss it. With Field Ready and doing humanitarian supplies, it was really about, we'd go there on the ground and actually personally interview the survivors and ask them what they needed. We'd also work with them to identify the differences between what they needed versus what they wanted. And I think in relation to what we really need to do in response to COVID is there was a lot of needs, and people knew about the general needs, but they didn't really know what the specific needs were of each hospital or of each clinic or of each school. And so I think where this need to identify precisely the top priorities was kind of, in my experience in the beginning, kind of missed. For example, there are a lot of people 3D printing supplies for masks, but they weren't actually able to identify the specific hospital that needed them. And a lot of the doctors that I knew that I was talking to, they couldn't openly admit that they needed PPE because of weird hospital politics at the beginning. So a lot of the stuff that was donated there actually got thrown out in the dumpsters. So it's kind of what they really needed was the people who could accept the PPE could actually, and there were people who could make it for them, but there was no one that could actually deliver the supplies. And so I think sometimes needs-based and identifying the problem, and in these cases, it wasn't so much about 3D printing a solution, it was about finding a solution of access and how you get people the things that they need. And so I think sometimes you really have to kind of step aside for a moment and analyze the entire problem, because yes, it was a major supply chain challenge for everyone with PPE, but there were a lot of pieces of that supply chain. And I think it's something that everyone should really think about as we move forward. And I think, Dorothy, you had some interesting words to say about that too, right?
Yeah, so I mean, basically, I mean, to piggyback on what you said, it's the exact thing. It's this idea of like who, talking to individuals and figuring out what they actually need in the community. I think you gave a great example, very similar to ones that I heard as well. And one of the things that Nation of Makers was able to do is partner with organizations like Get Us PPE that were a little bit closer to the hospitals, that were trusted brokers of information, that were able to communicate with the hospitals and act as that neutral broker to help makers understand what those needs exactly were. But I think that a lot of it is that, folks really want to help. I think when you're seeing the news every day and you're seeing people die, it's impossible to not want to do something about it, right? Especially as we know people. I think almost everybody now knows somebody who's had COVID. And many of us know someone who didn't make it or was, really, really impacted and is still suffering the secondary effects of having the infection. So I think that, as that increases, people want to do something to help. And that's really important, but it's really, really important to identify what the actual need is, with individuals that are actually going through that need. And I think it's challenging because people didn't want to bother the doctors, right? They're very, very busy. The healthcare workers were really, really, important and obviously still are in this response. And so, there's a desire not to overburden them, but it is really important that when you are trying to engage in social impact, whether it's globally or just domestically here in the United States, that you're finding out who you're trying to reach, who's your end user, and really having a conversation about what they, like Dara said, what they actually need, and not even, they may not even realize what they need. It's really a conversation that needs to be had.
And I think that's where with Meghan too, it's like finding the right people. And instead of just going off on your own and saying, I'm going to start a nonprofit, I'm going to supply PPE, is finding people who are already successfully doing it that you can piggyback off and support. Because it turns out that you can do a lot more when you help other people. Sometimes it could just be infrastructure. And I'll give a small example from, deploying to natural disasters myself. It's like, you kind of sometimes, I know everyone wants to help, and I'm so excited at like how many people came out to help and how many people are doing great things. But I'll give the example of disaster response. There's people who are disaster tourists. Like, they want to do good. And so they get really excited and they jump on a plane. They get there and they have the best of intentions, but they forget to bring their own food. They forget to bring their own shelter. So that means that they're taking the food away from the people who actually need the food that they're going to help. And they're taking shelter away from the people who have just become homeless because of the disaster. And sometimes you have to ask yourself, am I taking the spot on the plane of a doctor? I think it's great that we all want to help, but I think the most critical piece is to have allies and to reach out and collaborate with people who have successfully done this before, such as the NIH, who is also testing for quality of things, and Dorothy with Nation of Makers. There's so many resources out there that I think we've learned so much. The next time everyone can actually just tap into these resources, and we should maybe work on, a better infrastructure. And hopefully that's something we can talk about later too, so that people can get the access that they need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some. I mean, we'll be covering this as we go, but recognizing that the need could be identified by some of the great organizations, like the ones that you guys are leading and spearheading. So once you identify the need and there's a solution plan, sometimes it can still get out of sorts. You know the need, and then everyone make face shields, everyone make adapters. But there's still a lot of room for error there. Meghan, I think you can talk to us a lot about that.
Yeah, so, this whole initiative our partnership for COVID 3D Trust came about because, it was great and there is all this enthusiasm, but we're looking at social media and going, okay, all right, like whether it was the design or maybe conversations around materials, there just were a lot of unknowns, and we wanted to be able to help filter out the noise so that you would go and you would be able to print something that had been optimized. And the two of the issues is that some of these devices just fall into a gray area where they're not like capital R regulated, particularly face shields, and the FDA pre-market exemption and class 1, class 2. But regardless of wherever they fall on that, like, you still have safety criteria that you need to meet and functional requirements. And then, so the second aspect of that is that there just wasn't enough information about that. And information that was presented in terms that people would understand if they're outside of that domain. So we recognized that that wasn't available. I mean, this was just totally new when it came together. Like the MOU that we signed with the FDA and VA was drafted and signed within 10 days, which I think in federal government, like, is, I know, unheard of. That's like one of the things I'm really proud about. We're like, we got this done. And then of course with America Makes and all these discussions that we had. And so we were trying to fill some of those gaps. And the joke was that we were building the car while we drove it. And I think that was the experience for everyone in this space. But so essentially what we did is we sort of took this flood of designs, and then the VA has this amazing team of engineers that went and did these assessments. And we didn't want to say testing or validation, because again, those sort of standards weren't there. But just to say, like, okay, this has been printed. This one seems to be good. If you're going to use it in a community, this one has a higher level of protection that you could use this in a clinical setting and be safe. And the key with that quality and safety is that we're trying to protect ourselves and others against an infectious pathogen. But I think what we, going back to people directing their efforts, is that, like, people don't necessarily know what they don't know. And it's great to want to go and buy a printer, but these aren't plug and play. And there's everyone here would know there's so many parameters, and you can have a design file. It doesn't mean like you can get a million different things. So, trying to help people with that. And there's certainly things that we can improve on it, and that we are improving on and planning for the future. But I think it's really important that we can gather those resources and help people get up to speed on what's required on something that could be used in a healthcare setting, and getting kind of training and certifications for people to do that, even for large manufacturers who would, because of the agile nature of 3D printing, you don't have to retool your production line, you just print. Not just print, but relatively speaking. But we want them, people don't know, like, what does it mean to be up with current good manufacturing practices by the FDA, and how can we do that in future and help people be ready? Because there may not always be emergency use authorizations, but this could keep going. But then, and also that getting documentation and instructions for the design, so that and outside testing, so that you can confirm quality and safety. And one of the things that was concerning and that I really saw a need for, but it was just sort of there was some misrepresentation of the level of protection. Like, you can't call something an N95 mask, and you've got PLA on hand, but we don't know, what does that mean to wear a 3D printed mask with PLA on your face, all day, and humidity. And then there were so many different things to think about, and things just kind of being hyped in the media, and people were reaching out to us to say, like, can you give us this, really it was an informal in a sense, but it was this kind of rubber stamp that people wanted to be able to get. And we couldn't necessarily always do that because the designs didn't meet what we had determined, particularly based on the FDA, the VA's work, were the requirements to do that. So that was really kind of the driving goal, is how do we, I hate saying filter out the noise because it sounds negative, but that's I feel like that's the best way to describe that.
Yeah, no, I mean, Formlabs is so grateful, and Mara also shouted out from Matter Hackers her gratitude as well for us to sell the hardware. We were so grateful to help to organize our community around the NIH stance and approved pieces, because people mean well, and they're just trying to help, and maybe they just didn't get that information. So they're like, this too. So Dara, you're saying.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of it is identifying the need and then seeing if it's already been made, right? Mm-hmm. You don't have to, and also if you want to be efficient and really helpful, improve off of what's already been made and then get it checked. You're also much more likely to get it qualified quicker if you have something that's already been tried and proven. And so, for example, I bet lots of people were looking for oxygen adapters, didn't think that FieldReady had already posted free ones up that had been checked and used in the field before, so there's a lot of different use cases that we can all look at and kind of try to instead of everyone doing the same thing in their own silos, this was really an example of how we all needed to work together, interdependently with different organizations. And if we were one person, just raising your hand saying, hey, I have this, how can I be of service? Like that may have also be a really interesting way to approach it. So, and I think what Meghan did is just amazing.
That goes so well into my next question about ego and what it means to bring yourself into a challenging situation to solve a problem. And, intentions or not, you want to be part of it. How do you check yourself before you jump into identifying the need, or even when you're at the stage of understanding to just help an organization that's already doing something?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I can say is that, you do need to check yourself. And I think one of the things that you can do, and Dara just said that very, very well, which is, just check to see what else has been done. I think there's a human instinct, and especially with makers, I think we definitely want to make our stamp, right, and do our thing and make our thing that's, unique and make it by our own hands, right, and be able to show, look what I made, look what I printed. It's so amazing. And the first thing my daughter did when she got her 3D printer was print something, right, and then be like, Mom, look what I made. It's so exciting, that feeling. And so we're not trying to tell people that you shouldn't make things. I think it's just more of when you're trying to respond, even though you may feel like your design is the best thing next to sliced bread, it's really, really important to consider what else is out there and who else are your allies and partners who have been doing the work, right? And I think, one thing, I know Meghan and I had one conversation during the midst of this where she was like, if I see another person shield, and it's not to be offensive to Prusa or anyone that made a shield that was Prusa shield. What we're trying to say is that the number of shields that were submitted were really, really daunting, and they were just very minor changes. And
not even.
Some of them were changes that actually contributed to the safety. So, for example, at the beginning, the Prusa shields were formed without, many of you know, without the protective piece in the top that allowed for possibly virus to get in from the top, of the shield. And so many, many physicians and healthcare workers were like, oh my God, this is too unsafe. We can't use these. And so people made modifications. But then after that, there were really, really tiny things, like we wanted to print our name on it, or we wanted to, make a little divot here, because we think that's nicer, and those things are nice. But I think, when you think about the systems that we have to test and overloading that particular system and being able to do that because there's so many coming in, and the fact that, is what you're creating really, really transforming? Is your design transformative? Or is it just you saying, hey, I just want to have my stamp on things? It's totally human and normal to want to have, credit for something, to want to feel like you're contributing meaningfully, you personally. But I think there is a role, and honestly, we do better when we each are able to kind of, take our particular knowledge and utilize it with other people, right? And build on what other people have done and are doing. And consult with them. So, maybe there's already a group where you're going or where you're trying to have an impact, and you can, instead of creating a whole new, like Dara said, a whole new nonprofit, you piggyback up with them, and instead you have a faster impact, right? Because they're already set up. They're already ready to go. They already know what the need is. They've already done that assessment. So instead of you creating something new, you can build on what's already been done in a way that, yes, maybe it doesn't give you as much credit, but I think the credit that we're all looking for is that social impact, right? Like the idea when you see someone's face when they've received one of these items, right? And the look, we have thousands of pictures of doctors and healthcare workers and people on native tribal lands that receive these goods, and their faces are pure. I mean, that's enough ego for me. If no one says thank you, Dorothy, that doesn't matter. Seeing that person's gratitude in the midst of this crazy pandemic, and knowing that perhaps I gave them something that could protect them from this virus is thanks enough. But I think there were a lot of people, and there still are people that maybe that's not enough.
And I think that's the part, right? It's when you check with yourself and you need to have your name on it, that might be a warning sign, right? Being a part of a mission and a bigger journey, I think is really what impact is about, to echo what Dorothy was saying. And I think it's around efficiency also. Let's just talk about basic models, right? If you keep tweaking the models, it takes longer to print a lot of them. Unless you're making it a far more efficient print around structure, then you're actually just wasting material and wasting time with the printer and using power that could have been used for something else and putting carbon into the environment. And also your beautiful brain could have been used on making another product that hadn't been created yet. So these are also ways of looking at it. You can still help and just analyze, and instead of doing the exact same thing with slight iterations and slowing down the whole system, if you want to save lives, look at where the gaps are, right? Look at where the gaps are in the process.
And Dara, I'll just add on the other side of that, we saw a lot of people, it's great to want to print stuff with less materials and print it faster, but you can introduce, weaknesses in the structural integrity of something that, was a consideration. So yeah, a lot of face shields.
Death by iteration. I love it.
Death by face shield iteration.
I was really curious for you guys to know, we all are doing, actually anyone who's working in 3D printing is probably working in an iterative way because, well, prototyping is a thing, but also we're probably working with companies that are, adopting new technology. How do you guys, how do you test what's working also? You know the need and you have the solution. So recognizing when to stop iterating. What kind of I don't know, I'm so curious about the scales that you work in when you say, okay, this is enough validation for us to go hit it.
I have a very different process, so I'll let you guys go because I work in very different environments. So I'll let the responsible people speak first.
Well, I'll just say, and my group did not do any of the actual testing. We were just trying to keep the site running. But the VA did some really incredible work, and what we want to do moving forward, and we did have to do at one point, we have enough of these now. We can't look at any more because they're focused on it was moving from face shields to face masks and then to nasal swabs, and now it's pipette tips. It's a whole thing. But to be able to put out a call to action to